Perhaps his greatest contribution to the human experience is yet to come. For over 10 years, following in the footsteps of the late astronaut Colonel Gordon Cooper, our speaker has repeatedly asserted his view that the extraterrestrial explanation for UFO phenomena is the correct one, that Roswell indeed was a crashed extraterrestrial vehicle, and that the government is aware of this and has embargoed the truth from the American people.
And finally, the mainstream media is paying attention. In July of last year, a large radio audience in the UK heard these assertions for them the first time. The result was a media storm with over 200 interview requests, 50 plus articles, and a dozen television segments in the UK and the United States.
Playing a key role in ending the UFO ET truth embargo could well be the greatest achievement in a life of many achievements. PRG thinks so and awarded our speaker the Hall of Fame Lifetime Achievement Award last year. At that time, he gave the 2008 keynote address. This year, PRG invited him to come and talk about the totality of his intersection with the UFO ET issue, the media response, the responses of his peers, and perhaps more importantly, his thoughts on the disclosure process and the post-disclosure world that most certainly lies ahead.
Please welcome Dr. Edgar Mitchell to X Conference 2009.
Good morning, all, and thank you for that overwhelming introduction. I have to write that down myself so I can use it occasionally. I'm a big picture person, and so this morning, very briefly, let's talk about the big picture. The 21st century that we're in, the 20th century was quite an amazing century, and the 21st is even going to be more. I think we will probably, in the 21st century, become a part of the community of planets that has intelligent life aboard. And it's about time. When I speak to young people, which I do frequently, and they're just beginning to study history and science in their early schooling, I try to set the stage in the following way. I point out that my great-grandparents went across from Georgia to West Texas after the Civil War, our Civil War, to start a new life in the 1870s. Railroads weren't completed across the South and the West. They went in covered wagons pulled by horses. Lights weren't invented. My father was born shortly after the Wright brothers made the first flight, and I went to the moon. So from covered wagons, thank you, from covered wagons to going to the moon was the mark of the late 19th and 20th century. And before that time, as we all know, people walked, rode horses, camels, whatever they could tame. The ancient Phoenicians started exploring the waters of the Mediterranean in their frail boats 4,000 or so years ago. The South Sea Islanders in their dugout canoes were exploring the South Pacific somewhere in that same time frame. Our parents' generation went into the air, and our generation went into space. Does that progression tell you something? And we have had the rumors, and for a goodly portion of the 20th century, that we weren't alone in the universe, but no one believed that. Even when I went to the moon in 1971, it was the conventional wisdom, both in science and religion and culture, that we were alone in the universe. And we now know that is simply not true. But coming to accommodate that in the larger sense is what we have to do, and that's what this century, I believe, is all about. And we are a major part of that right here in this room. Those of us in this room are leading the way to help get that idea out and operant in our culture. I also like to tell the story to help move this along. Now, we do have a little bit of time left, but I like to point out that our star is a mainstream star and not much different than most of the stars in the universe. It has a finite lifetime. Our star is about halfway through its life cycle, which means it has about 4 billion years left. Now that seems like a lot of time to us, but in the life cycle of stars and the universe, it's not much. So, if our species is to survive, we have to be off this planet before our sun burns up. Now that's the big picture that I like to set up, because it's a part of our burgeoning science that we really didn't know at the beginning of the 20th century. The Big Bang idea of how all this came to be only began in the 1920s with Hubble's observing redshift. And it now looks like, and this is conjecture, it looks like the Big Bang is probably on its way out as a discussion or as a theory of how it all began. And it is very likely, and my team happens to be working on it very passionately, that the proper theory has to do with the steady state universe and the continuous creation of matter in the universe itself. And we will see how that plays out over the next decade or so, but I feel fairly confident that's what's happening. And if there's anything that should put a new light on this universe that we live in, or the universes if it's plural, and I really don't know how you define other universes, except maybe the laws of physics aren't the same everywhere, so that would be a proper definition of a universe, that the law has a consistent laws of physics. And it's not necessary that it's the same laws that we have here, but we don't have a way of proving that at this point. In any event, we live in challenging, magnificent, wonderful times, and one of the major things that we have to deal with in our lifetimes is one we're dealing with right now, is the fact that we are not alone in the universe. And as we examine what we have done in the last 100 years, we are not any longer on a sustainable path. Maybe we never were, but we're not on a sustainable path now, because thanks to our science and technologies, the Industrial Revolution really didn't get underway in a strong way until the middle of the 19th century, with the greats in science and improved medicine and science in the late 19th century. And into the 20th century, all of a sudden it took off, with the population exploding from over 2 billion people at the beginning of the 20th century to 6.5 billion at the end of the 20th century, and where we are now. And it appears from the best evidence that this planet can sustain the lifestyle and consumption patterns of Western industrial society for only about 2 billion people. So we got a problem. And it's up to us on the forefront of all of this to help resolve these issues and find ways to get along together. And it's very clear that we must put away these notions that the way we get along is to kill each other, because our weapons that we have created thanks to the magnificence of our science and technologies in the 20th century, the weapons that we have created, if we don't learn to get along, we will surely use them on each other, and that'll be the end of it altogether. So we in this room and those of like mind around us have an enormous challenge in the next few years if we're going to set the stage with our children and grandchildren to keep this civilization going and this planet going. The challenge is ours. And I thank you for joining me in that today. Thank you.